And I was walking along, and then there was this orange flash. It felt like the sky just clicked, turned bright orange, and click, just went right back to normal nighttime sky. So it was rotating and descending at this odd angle, right? And the motion was so eerie, like it didn't make sense. So looking out, there was this bright light, and there were 5 gray beings walking towards the house. And she turns a corner, and there in full daylight on the trail is a gray alien. And it looked at her, and she looked at it. She literally hears like this panicky reverberation where she hears owl, 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 owl. And she watches this gray being morph into an owl. It turned around and walked into the woods.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the UAP Sessions. I'm your host, Scott Murtha, and today I am joined by special guest, author and researcher, Mike Clelland. Through his personal experiences, which fueled over a decade of research, Mike has been able to draw a connection between the UFO phenomenon and owls. In fact, he's authored several books on the subject, most notably, The Messengers. Through his research, Mike has collected numerous stories of real owls showing up during and around UFO sighting events. But sometimes the owls are not real. And in these cases, what is it that's masking itself and masquerading as an owl? Join me as we dive into Mike Clelland's research on UFOs and owls. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the UAP Sessions. I'm your host, Scott Murtha, and I am here with author and researcher Mike Clelland. Mike, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much. It's my honor.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. I did want to tell you first off the bat, it's kind of weird. And I don't know if this is a coincidence, just a coincidence, or if there is more of a synchronicity to it. Owls aren't seen too often normally by people, not that often. And usually a week prior to a show, I start kind of mentally prepping for it and coming up with ideas and questions. And this past week, pretty much the day I decided, hey, I'm going to start prepping for the show, I've seen an owl twice in my backyard this week, which is really weird because I usually don't see owls that often.
Have you seen them in your backyard ever before?
So we moved to this house where we live now like 3 years ago. And I think I saw an owl like once 3 or 4 years ago here. And it was like just one time. And it was like on the neighbor, like behind my house, you can see another house. So like I was on the roof of their house. And that was the only other time I seen an owl for 4 years. And then this week I've seen an owl twice in my backyard. And I was like, is this just a coincidence or have Mike Clelland coming on the show? So
I am so used to hearing this. I hear this all the time. I had a fellow, like people will see, podcast hosts will see owls the night before the show, or they'll wake up that morning to an owl hooting out their window the day of the show, or they'll, after we get done recording, they'll text me or email me within a half hour and say, oh, just when we finished, I saw an owl. It's unbelievably common. It's not every show, but I do a lot of podcasts and one guy, his name is Juan. He hosts a show called Juan on Juan. And he was in it, which is a great name for a show, but he was in the next day we were going to do the interview. So it was nighttime. Mm-hmm. I think he's in Florida. He was in his backyard with his wife and his son. His son was little, like 5. And he said, I'm going to have Mike Clelland on the show. Maybe I'll see an owl. And right then his son goes, Dad, look. And an orange orb floats through the backyard.
Whoa. So
he thinks to himself, oh, I'm going to see an owl. And then he sees what amounts to a UFO.
Huh.
I mean, I've got so many stories of people seeing owls. It's just, really in connection with the podcast. Now, you talk to people who are, like when his wife is pregnant, he sees pregnant women everywhere. There's like, you can't,
Right.
like there's pregnant women everywhere. Or if you're thinking about like, oh, I'm thinking about getting like a, I want to get a blue Prius. And then you see blue Priuses everywhere.
Right.
So there is like, there's something built into the whole, just reality itself that seems to, but I'm very aware of the owl thing showing up in connection to exactly what we're doing now.
That's so bizarre. That's crazy. Yeah, I saw that. And after I saw it the first time, which was weird because it was the day I was like, okay, I'm gonna start prepping. And then that night I saw an owl. And then literally 2 days ago, I went outside in the morning to let the dog out, and there it was just sitting in the same spot I saw it like a week earlier. So it was just really weird. Okay, so Mike, I know that you have had experiences with the UFO phenomenon as a child, and that's kind of what kicked off your interest in the subject. Am I correct?
Sure. It was the 70s, and I was a kind of a nerdy kid, and there was a lot of TV shows and books in the library and things like that. There's a series of books called The Time Life Mysteries of the Unexplained, and I loved that stuff. So I was kind of like, it was the kind of thing that would have interested me regardless. But yeah, so I have a few. I'm happy to talk about some of them.
Yes, please.
And I'll tell you, like, I denied this stuff. Like, I was like not going there. Like, I just put the lid on it, and I wasn't going to consider this as being any kind of reality. And then I'll also say that in that chapter of the 70s, it was like the abduction stuff wasn't on the radar at all. Like, so it was just, that was really before. That was before Whitley Strieber's book came out. That was before Bud Hopkins' stuff came out. And then the stuff with Betty and Barney Hill and things like that, that was really, like, you had to dig pretty deep to stumble upon that stuff in that chapter. But I was, so when I was 12 years old, a couple things happened. I was walking home from a high school football game, and where I lived in the neighborhood and grew up, the high school was pretty close. And I would have been 12 years old. So I wasn't in high school yet, but it was just the thing that the kids all did on Friday night. They went to the high school for the game. And so you could stand in our driveway and listen, and you could hear the football game. Like, it wasn't that far away. And so I wanted to leave in time to see a television show. So I knew what time the television show would start, which was at 10 o'clock. This is actually interesting. It was a show, Kolchak the Night Stalker. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
I hadn't, no.
Oh, it's the show that Chris Carter, the fellow who started the X-Files, when they asked him, why did you start the X-Files? He said, I wanted to do a show that was just like Kolchak the Night Stalker. So it has this it was like kind of a, it was a instead of a, it was a reporter who would look into all these kind of paranormal things with ghosts and zombies and vampires, and there were a few UFO episodes in the show. I loved it. Was perfect as a 12-year-old boy. It was just exactly the kind of thing that would just float my boat. So I wanted to see that show. It was on at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. So I said, I'm going to be home at 9:30. So I left the football game plenty of time, and I told my parents I'm going to be home at 9:30, and we're walking, me and a friend, his name was also Mike. We're walking through the neighborhood, and there was a spot where I could pinpoint it exactly. I could put an X on the sidewalk in chalk, and it was just about a block away from my home. And I was walking along, and then there was this orange flash. It felt like the sky just click, turned bright orange, and click, just went right back to normal nighttime sky. And this was in autumn, totally calm night in the Midwest. Just like, there was no, like, we did the thing as 12-year-old boys. We were like, was that lightning? There's no thunder. It was totally silent. Was it like an explosion? That didn't make sense. We talked about if like the power lines somehow zapped, but that didn't make sense either. But for me, my memory was the whole sky instantaneously lit up bright, glowing orange, like the entirety of the sky. And then just click, went right back to normal nighttime sky. And then I got to my house in the neighborhood. It was just another block to walk. And he lived a little further deeper into the neighborhood, so he kept on walking. And then I walked in the house. My parents were angry at me. And they're like, what are you angry at me for? And they were like, you're out too late. So you were supposed to be home at, it's like, it's 9:30. I told you to be home at 9:30. And they pointed to the clock, and it was 11:30.
Wow.
And I know. So this is well before anyone the subject of missing time. Didn't make any sense to me. And I felt, you know what, I remember feeling so like, no, they have no right to be mad at me because I came home in time, but just the clock being wrong made no sense at all.
Huh.
And then the next Monday at school, me and the kids were sitting around, and this was at the junior high school in the cafeteria.
Mhm.
And this fellow, Mike, that I was with, I said, hey, something weird happened when we were walking home from the football game on Friday night. I was going to say about the orange sky. And he said, yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And I remember thinking, like, I never saw a light. I never saw a UFO. Like, what is he talking about? And my very, very first reaction was, I remember this so clearly, like, he's lying. He's totally lying. But having researched it, it's become like, it's very common in the reporting that one person will see something and another person will see something else, or years will go by and one person will have one memory and another person will have another memory. But I remember that very clearly on the next Monday.
Wow.
So, and you know what? I reached out to him recently. I found him on Facebook, and I hadn't seen him talked to him in like 35, 40 years or something. And so I reached out and I said, hey, do you remember this night? And I kind of prepped him, and he's like, and I wanted him to tell the story, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I told the story I just told you, and he's like, you know what? I got no memory at all of that. But
wow,
I do remember your parents being angry at you, which is a funny detail for him to remember.
right.
And so that was, I have that story and a few other stories like that. I had a close-up sighting of what looked like a coffee can in the sky right around that same time. And it was at the nighttime sky. It was at a friend's sleepover, and we saw it out the window for like 30 seconds. Do I have anything? No, I don't have anything. Sometimes I have something. Anyway, but it was like this rotating coffee can that was coming down in the night sky, and it was moving in this weird, eerie way. It was here. I'll do this. Here's my pen. This is my pen jar. Let me just get rid of the pens. So this is this little jar like here. So this is actually pretty good. So it was rotating and descending at this odd angle, right? A helicopter would fly like this. A balloon would bob around, but it was rotating and descending, and the motion was so eerie, like it didn't make sense. And then we watched for like 20 or 30 seconds, and click, it just disappeared.
Wow.
And we went downstairs and made a drawing of it, and that drawing is on my blog, and it's in the messengers too. And then I reached out to Kenny like 30 years later and said, do you remember that night? And he said, no, I don't remember anything from that night. And I said, yeah, I remember we went downstairs and we drew it, and I still have the drawing, and that's the drawing that's on my, and I've done an updated version, which is much tighter in the blog and in one of the books. But almost the same thing happened. He said, he called me back the next day, and he said, you know what? I talked to my mom, and she remembers that we came down, that we drew this thing. She remembers us at the kitchen table drawing this thing.
Huh.
And so that's a lesser tier of confirmation than if he had remembered it, but still that meant a lot to me. So I mean, I have the paper, so I know I drew it. And I have a very clear memory of it. But so yeah, so those events played out as a little boy, and so whenever I would hear like a report of a UFO or something like that, I would kind of think, well, like, I saw something. Why should I doubt the farmer who said they saw something land in their farmer's field when I saw something I can't explain too?
Right. Wow. And then you also had an experience where you actually saw beings, correct?
I was 30. Yeah. So I'm 63 now. So that's more than half my life ago. So I was 30 years old, and I was living in Maine, and it was wintertime, and excuse me. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was alone in the house, and there was a bright light shining through the window. And I sat up on one elbow and kind of looked out through the window, which was pushed right up against the head of the bed was right up against the window. So looking out, there was this bright light And it would be great if it was like the size of a flying saucer. It wasn't. The light was about the size of a washing machine. It was kind of low on the ground. And there were 5 gray beings walking towards the house. They were like close to the outside of the house. I mean, maybe 15, 20 feet away. They weren't walking right towards the house. They were kind of going off to the side of the house where the front door would have been. And I dismissed this as a dream at the time, and it was very dreamlike in the sense that there was a sort of distorted atmosphere around the whole event. Like my mind was too clear, like there was a hyper reality connected with all this, and it was eerily quiet in a way that didn't match normal reality. And so like I cannot confirm that this did or didn't happen. So anyway, these beings are walking towards the house. Now I'll also add that I was reading Bud Hopkins' book Intruders. And I had fallen asleep reading that book. That book was on the bedside table. So I just said, well, wow, my mind was just swimming with this imagery, and that just emerged in a dream. But so I was sitting looking out the window, and I heard like what felt like a voice in my head that said, "Oh yes, it's them. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did. I just put my head on the pillow and blacked right out instantly. And now I think this maybe lasted 20, 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Very clear. I got up the next morning, drew it. I'll also say I never even went out to look if there were footprints in the snow. It was full middle of winter. There was snow in the yard, and I never looked to see. Like I never walked out to where the bright light was. I never looked at where, well, this is something I've talked about in my book and I've been very open about this in my podcast. I was really depressed at that point in my life. Like it was seasonal depression. It was right in the darkest part of the winter. It was right in January. And it was bad. Like it's as bad as it's ever gotten. And I went on medication shortly. Actually, you know what? I had just gone on medication. I had sought out treatment in December, and this would have been January. Okay. I don't have the exact date. So, and I can't separate my mood from the event. And when I do the research now, when people have an experience, I will ask, what was going on in your life leading up to the event? And then what changed after? Mm-hmm. And so leading up to the event, I was brutally depressed. And then what changed after is I really did a lot of hard work and really tried to take care of my mental, like really worked hard to get out of that depressive state. Right. In the book, I'm sorry if I'm going on too long here.
No, you're good.
And I've written about it, so it's out there, but like I was suicidal. And I have speculated, because I do not know, but I have speculated, did they, so I did not follow through with suicide, but did they arrive at that night, those beings, in some way to cause me not to commit suicide? Like I've speculated about that, and I can't answer one way or another. And I don't want to say something like, if I said aliens saved my life and kept me from following through with that, that would not be true, because I simply don't know it to be true. But I really have wondered that they showed up at such, like at that point in my life, that pivotal point in my life. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because at this point you've had ongoing experiences with seeing craft and things of this phenomenon. So maybe they have some type of interest in you because you keep seeing them. Mm-hmm. And maybe they felt whatever their interest is in you, they felt like, hey, I need to we're gonna protect this guy, and maybe they did intervene. It's possible.
I'm very open to that as a possibility, but I can't say it with certainty. And then to be also like I go for decades without seeing anything or seeing any kind
Right.
of, like, it's been, I mean, the last thing I really, as far as a light in the sky kind of thing, was 2013, which is, that's 13 years ago.
Right. And what happened in that incident?
Oh, that one's a long one to tell because it's kind of gets all tied up with a bunch of other stories. But I was sleeping out under the stars, coming home from a UFO conference. I was already doing a podcast. I was already writing on the blog. I slept out under the stars, driving home. At the time, I was living in Idaho, and the conference was in Arizona. It was called the IUFOC, the International UFO Congress, and they did these, like, I think at the time it was 5 days long. It was really a long conference. And I was driving home so I was driving through the really beautiful parts of southern Utah. And I love that terrain. But I just, it's that I did a lot of outdoor work. So I had a big winter sleeping bag, and I had a big thick pad and a pillow. And I just camped on the side of the road and just slept out under the stars. And I woke up that night and looked up at this hillside, and on this hilltop, I looked up there and I said, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I have got illustrations. This is on my blog. I got the GPS coordinates of where I was lying. I got the GPS coordinates of what, like, exactly on the hilltop where I figure it was sitting. And so I was like totally like documenting this stuff obsessively. And I thought to myself, well, like, wow, if that was like a flying saucer, like, I was just at a UFO conference. I've had little psychic flashes and things like that. So if it was a flying saucer, I would know it, right? Because it would be like, I would, like, how, wouldn't you feel like some sort of cosmic flying saucer energy or something? And I laid there in this sleeping bag, and it was totally calm, and this beautiful night with the stars. And I just remember looking up at this thing from my pillow, and like, I felt nothing. Like, I just stared at this thing. I'm like, I don't feel anything. I just dismissed it. It was like, it looked like it was like a slice out of a cylinder, like, like a water tank that you would have at but it was at the very top of a hill, which is like, you wouldn't put a water tank at the very top of the hill, especially in like a totally desolate rural part of Utah. But it looked like a water tank it was black in the scene in the night. So it's not like it was painted black, and then it had lights around the outside of it. Now, what's weird is, I remember this very clearly. The lights, if it was like a flying saucer, the lights would want to be evenly spaced.
Right.
But they weren't. They were a little bit erratic. Like, they weren't. So I remember thinking, like, wow, there's like it must be windows, or someone has a light on in there, or maybe it's some sort of cell tower thing. And then I rolled over and went back to sleep. And I woke up again later, and there was a coyote howling at, like, right in the bushes near me. And I sat up, and that was actually two coyotes. One was a little further away. And I've slept outside because I was doing all this outdoor work for 25 years. And I've heard a lot of coyotes, and I've slept out alone under the stars. That was not a big deal for me at all. But I was like, what? Why? And the coyotes, especially down in that part of the world, are tiny. So it's not like I was afraid of this, would have been afraid of a little. So anyway, I couldn't understand why I couldn't see him. It was so close. And then that round thing, that round structure, was still on the hilltop. And then I laid down and went back to sleep. And I woke up a third time, and I sat up, and there was a bright light behind this juniper bush. And a juniper bush is pretty dense. So there's this juniper bush right at my feet, and there was a light behind it. And I sat up and I did the thing, like, how do I, and it didn't seem like a flashlight. It didn't seem like there was one other car parked there. So someone else was doing the same exact thing I was doing. They like mapping out, like, where my car was versus the other car, that it wasn't in the same spot. And I was like, well, maybe someone else has just pulled off and is here doing the same thing. But it didn't match a headlight of a car or a dome light. And then I just laid down and went back to sleep. And then after that, I had a whole bunch of, I'm happy to tell all this. We might not get to any other questions if we go down this road, but a bunch of things happened. And so that happened on March 10th, 2013. And then on so it took another day or the rest of the day, the next day to get home. And then I wrote all this stuff up. I was obsessively writing about this stuff, and I put a blog post on with the GPS coordinates, and I did a rendering of the thing on the hilltop. You can look that up on my blog. And then the next day after that, so there would have been 10th, the night of the 10th, I saw the thing. The day of the 11th, I got home and made a blog post. And the day of the 12th, I started my book, The Messengers. I literally started the book, The Messengers, on the 12th. I have it.
Interesting.
I have my notes and everything like that. And so the initial pen to page, I guess, typing onto the computer began less than 48 hours of seeing that round structure on the hill and the bright light behind the bush.
That's really interesting. And when you woke up in the morning, were you able to see the structure still or no?
You know what? I was still dark when I woke up in the morning, and I may have seen it. I don't remember. I don't remember looking up, and I would have looked up, but I simply don't remember. And I that's in my notes right back to, as a diary entry, right back to. So I certainly could have seen it.
All right. So yeah, that's really interesting. And then those were your UFO experiences you had, and this is all before the owls came into play. Is that correct?
Well, March 13th.
Well, not the hill one. Correct.
Yeah,
you would have had that. That's when you wrote the Messenger.
Owls went berserk in my life in 2006.
And can you give us a little bit of how that started?
Sure. So at the time, 2006, I would have been 44 years old, and I was living in a beautiful little town right near Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Jackson's on the Idaho state line, and I was just on the other side in Idaho, in a little town called Driggs, Idaho, and really gorgeous, town. And I was a ski bum, and I was working for this outdoor school, and I was doing. It was just I have this chapter of my life that's just astonishing, and so I spent tons and tons of time outside. I'd been working in Alaska all summer, and with a huge pack, because I was doing mountain work on the big glaciated peaks and doing 30-day trips with, on glaciers and stuff. And so, I got back and I wanted to just go into the woods with a light pack. So I met this woman in the town, and she worked there was a branch of the school. The school is the National Outdoor Leadership School. I used to not say the name of the school, but it's been enough years now that I'm not going to, my nuttiness won't soil their good name. And her name is Kristen. And I have my own podcast. I just interviewed Kristen recently, and she told her side of the story. It was really interesting. So Kristen and it was funny because it was like, I tell this story, and we went camping for one night. I tell this story, and people are like, you went on a first date camping with someone? And I'm like, it was like, this was like camping culture. You can get away with it. That was the vibe of the town, So, so I went with this total stranger. We went into the mountains, and I had been, and we went with really light packs, just like sneakers and light packs. We were only going to spend one night. We didn't even bring a tent because the weather is so reliable in the autumn that there was not going to be any rain that night. So, and I remember I was sitting on a big flat rock in this gorgeous place, and it was like kind of on a high up, and there was a big deep canyon next to us, and there was this big granite wall or limestone walls on the other side of us, and the sun was setting, and I was having this conversation with Kristen, and it came a point in the conversation where I was like, whoa, this is like, I'm impressed. Like I did not expect this. Like this was a stranger, complete stranger. And now I'm like, wow, this person is smarter and more spiritual and more insightful than I would have ever thought. And at that moment, an owl flew over us, and then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next couple of hours, these three owls flew around us. And when we actually laid our sleeping bags down on the ground without a tent, so we were looking straight up into the stars, these owls would fly right past our faces, and the stars would blot out, just blink for just a half a second. And their owls are totally silent in flight. It was so magical. And so after this, I said, let's go. That was great. That was awesome. We had this cool, let's go camping again. She says, let's go camping again. So 4 days later, we went to a totally different part of the mountains. And as the sun was setting, it was a little colder. So I said, let's walk up to that hilltop. There was just this round hilltop. And this is what's above tree line. And tree line is a zone in elevation in the mountains where above the certain level, there's no trees. So it was a completely wide open tundra, but there were some trees that were sort of stumpy, scrubby little trees as opposed to tall, adult, mature looking trees. So we walk up to the top of this hill, the sun sets, and then the same thing happens. 3 owls flew around us. And the 4 days before, they kind of kept their distance a little bit, but this time they were like right up close. And I remember one of them landed at Kristen's feet. And it was really interesting to talk with her on the podcast and hear all this stuff from her point of view too, and her memories. And what I did not say at the time, but what I'm saying now, and I almost can't shut up about it, was I heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And so I'm looking at real little owls, they're like 10-inch tall, cute little owls. They're called short-eared owls, pretty common. And so I'm looking at these real owls, and I hear a voice in my head say, this has something to do with the UFOs. You know what? I actually wrote it down in the book, and I'm so hesitant to say this, but I wrote this down in a diary entry. And I tell this story all the time, and I never. So here's what it said in my diary entry, which is in the book. It said, this has something. I'm looking at a real owl. Voice in my head says, this has something to do with the UFOs. You are an abductee.
Oh, wow.
And so I just realized recently, like I tell this story all the time. I always drop that line.
Huh.
But I was like, I made the notes right afterwards in a diary entry. And that's what the real memory is. And I think I'm just like, I don't know why but I remember thinking just recently, like, I got to tell that story correctly, because that's not accurate. Yeah. That changes it a lot. Yeah. So,
that's pretty significant.
Yeah. And then I started, that would have been 2006. So Kristen, shortly after that, she was working for the school. She moved out of the Valley. We kept in touch. And then, I started the blog, and one of the first blog posts I did was just the story I just told of Kristen and that camping trip with the owls. And I remember, what were we talking about? What were we talking about that first night just before those first owls arrived? And I called her up and I said, what were we talking about? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what we were talking about. She said, I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. And that's when that first owl showed up. And I'm like, so earlier I said, there's the questions I ask. What was going on leading up to the event? What changed after? And like, what leading up to the event, like we were talking about, is there a God? What, and then boom, those owls appear. And then after, like, my life totally changed. Like, I got so obsessed with the owl thing. And because of the voice in my head, I started looking into the UFO mystery. Like, I started reaching out to UFO researchers, particularly Leo Sprinkle, who was a researcher. He's since passed away, out of Laramie, Wyoming. And I was like, I think I might have had contact experiences. Like, I was obsessively reading books at the time, and that still continues with reading books on the subject. And so like leading up to the event, like we were talking about God, and after the event, we were talking. I mean, I started looking to my own experiences, and what happened was I was flooded. Like my world just unraveled after that camping trip, and I was having powerful synchronicities, and I had a blog, and in the blog I was writing about the synchronicities, and I was like basically writing, this happened yesterday, here's the weird thing that happened this morning. So it's this real time archive of my coming to terms with this. So I was like struggling in real life in the moment on this blog, and I haven't kept up with the blog in years now, but there was about a 10-year period where I was really dedicated from about 2009 to 2019. I really was dedicated to putting everything in the blog, and the world changed, and blogs didn't mean the same thing. And I got really wrapped up in writing the books. So the blog kind of fell to the wayside, and it's still on there. If anyone wants to look, there's a bunch of dead links and stuff like that. I have to keep up with it, but I haven't. So anyway, so there, you asked how I got into this, and that's how I.
Huh. So it's really interesting too, because through your research, you've been able to find different ways that owls are linked to UFOs. And one of those seemed to be through screen memories.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just give a brief definition of screen memories, what that is? And then if you have some stories that you can relay on that, that would be awesome.
So the screen memory is the implication. So here's a story. This happened. I was at a UFO conference. I was going to these UFO conferences, and I was not at peace in my life. I was like, ooh, like I think this involves me, but at the same time, I was like, no way, not going there. I'm going to deny it. I'm not going to deal with this. But at the same time, I was sure acting like someone who had something. Like I was so obsessively trying to understand this mystery, at the same time flooded with synchronicities about UFOs and owls, starting right there in 2006. So probably around 2008, 8, I went to a UFO conference, and they have like an experiencer support group. So you sit in a circle like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and everyone talks about their experiences. And actually Leo Sprinkle was hosting it, and that's where I met him.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, actually, I'll back up. I had actually met him before then, but he was hosting this experiencer round group. And a person who was in the room kind of raised his hand cautiously at the end of the meeting. And he said, hey, listen, I have a question for everyone. Anyone here? Has anyone here ever had an odd experience with an owl? And this guy almost fell out of his chair when everyone raised their hand.
Oh, wow.
Including me. And then he was like, so he told his story. He said, I was driving down the road at night, and there was this great big owl on the side of the road, like a 4-foot tall owl. So he pulls up and he rolls his window down. This owl's right outside the window, and he's looking at it, and it's like looking right in the window at him, and he gets this really bad feeling. And he drives on. And he was a photographer, and he went into the woods, and he was photographing owls, real owls. This was sometime afterwards. And he's looking through his camera with his zoom lens, and he's looking at these real owls, and he goes, oh, I don't think that was an owl I saw that night. Like he's looking at a real owl, and he's like, oh, this does not match what I saw. And so he went through hypnotic regression, and the only thing that emerged was the owl was wearing boots. So that the implication is that, and I've talked to a lot of abduction researchers, many of whom use hypnosis, not all of them, but some of them use hypnosis as part of the research. And the implication is, and I will say mostly the gray beings, there's other beings that show up in these reports, but mostly the gray beings with the bald heads, the big black eyes, I've listened to the transcripts or read the transcripts and listened to the audio recordings of people being hypnotized, and the hypnotherapist will say, like, okay, go back to that night where you saw the 4-foot tall owl on the road. And the person will say, okay. And then the hypnotherapist will say, like, describe the owl. And under hypnosis, the person will say, well, it's skinny and it's bald and it's got big black eyes and it's got this tight-fitting spacesuit on. And I don't think that's an owl. So the implication is that these gray beings have some ability, whether it's technology or whether it's through psychic means, to put an impression in the mind of the observer that they're seeing something else. And one of the things that it shows up is an owl. There's other things too. Deer, owl and deer are at the top of the list. I've talked to a lot of the people who did this research, and owl and deer are at the top of the list. And then below that are lesser things like squirrels and raccoons and cats and firemen, and clowns. Clowns show up, which
Creepy.
Fear of clowns. Like,
Right.
well, that's right where the fear of clowns comes from. So,
Right.
and so, and then there's a woman who I trust, a good friend of mine. She was working at a summer camp for girls. She's in her 50s now, but at the time she was 19 years old. And there was two campsites in the wilderness. Excuse me. And one campsite was over here and one campsite was over here, and they had to walk along a trail. There's the two flat spots where they could get the tents. So they just had to walk along the trail to get to their campsite. So she could hear the girls in the back, behind her, the girls laughing and talking. And she's walking on this trail to the other campsite, just a short distance. And she turns a corner, and there in full daylight on the trail is a gray alien. And she said, to see this, she knew she was having contact experiences, and she'd had them since she was younger, and she was very aware that something was going on in her life, but everything had happened at night. So here it was, bright sunshine day, and she said it was so freaky to see the gray being, like the bright sunlight on that chalky white head, and it looked at her and she looked at it, and if you've read through the research, almost all of the communication, like 100% of the communication with these beings, is telepathic. So she gets this like telepathic, like, oh crap, I'm busted. And she looks at this thing and it looks at her, and she literally hears like this panicky reverberation where she hears owl, 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 owl. And she watches this gray being morph into an owl. And it turned around and walked into the woods. She actually went back later and followed the track where it walked into the woods, and it just kind of almost like slid into the woods like on a hovercraft. But when she walked in and actually followed what she thought was the track, there was like this tall grass, right, and then there was a dip. And then the dip went back up. So if it was walking, it would have had to walk down and then walk back up. But it didn't. She had just floated like on a hovercraft. So there is weird stuff woven into this that how to say. So one of the ways I don't want to say the BS detector is, if someone tells me a story, here's my UFO sighting, or here's my owl sighting, and if it makes sense, if it's like logical, then I'm like, ooh, like I gotta, my red flag goes up and I doubt it. But if it's got some weird element that nobody would make up, or some level of absurdity tied into it, then I trust it even more, because that's what I've found in this research. Oh, and let me also say that, like, people are coming to me with their owl stories. I'm well known as the owl guy, and I'm getting all kinds of stories. So, but the stories that are coming to me are owls co-joined with UFOs. So I'm not getting a cross section of the population. I'm not getting the cross section of people who just saw a UFO. I'm getting the people UFO and owls. And I'll tell you that you add an owl to the mix, it makes everything like it's like the totem animal of the weirdness, of the high strangeness. Like, if there's an owl as part of the story, it's the weirdest of the weird. That maybe, right? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I totally get that. And it's interesting too, because that owl holds like kind of like a cultural significance in many cultures across the world. The owl is a powerful symbol. So it's interesting how it's kind of appearing kind of around UFO sightings, but then also being used as a screen memory. Do you think that they're using owls as a screen memory as a way to just kind of, I don't know, make it something that like to kind of illustrate the like kind of exclamation point on it, like this is a powerful moment? Or do you think it's kind of like, oh, it's because a disguise, so they don't see me?
Well, it could be both. I mean, you talk to the UFO researcher, and I've talked to the researchers, and they're very pragmatic about it. And they're just like, oh, they just use the owl because they sort of look like a gray alien. I'm like, well, a barn owl does have an eerie resemblance to a gray alien. They've got this, they're kind of the chalky white color, but the barn owl is like, if you saw an 11-inch tall barn owl, that's pretty big. So
Right.
we're not talking like, if there's no such thing as a 4-foot tall barn owl.
Right.
And so I would argue that they're choosing the owl, but so they're not just choosing the owl, but they're choosing a deer, which is well, now there's a term archetype. So I'm arguing that the owl is an archetype, and the beings are choosing that archetype because it holds a significance in our collective unconscious. There's no way I can prove this, but
Right.
it feels right. Like when I started framing things that way, like things just clicked in my research. So like an archetype is one of those funny words that like philosophy students stay up all night arguing, what it may or may not mean. And it's funny. I ask people all the time, like, how would you define archetype? And I've asked like philosophers and mythology professors. Everyone's got a different definition of an archetype. So it's a little bit open-ended. But when I talk to people or when people reach out to me, I don't even have to ask them. They say, even if they see an owl on the fence post in their yard, they all kind of say like, wow, there was a majesty to this animal. Like when it locked eyes on me, it felt like it was looking into my soul. Like I felt blessed to see this magnificent animal. Nobody says that about seeing the bunny rabbit, or the, right. But owls have a mystique and a presence that not many animals have. So in the folklore or the mythology of the owl, all around the world, there's a lot of owl mythology, but it's different. The owl mythology in Norway is different than the owl mythology in Mexico, and then the owl mythology in Siberia is different than the owl mythology in Africa. But there's kind of if there's one thread to it, is that the owl can see into the night, and they can see into the darkness. Now, modern man can just say, well, they have highly developed eyeballs because of they're evolutionarily they've become adept at seeing and hunting in the night, and a biologist can look at their eyeballs under a microscope and say they have a disproportionate number of cones and rods to our eyes, so they have a higher ability to see in the night sky, and they have big eyes, which is exactly what any nocturnal animal would have to see in the darkness. But the owl can fly in the forest in complete darkness, or what we would call complete darkness. There's enough available light for them to see just fine. They're flying through the forest, darting through the trees in the darkest, like we would have no ability to see anything, and they're completely at home. That must have been magic to ancient man, but to modern man, we can brush it off as evolution. But to ancient man, it was magic. So I'm kind of like, oh, I like that. The lore of the owl is they fly to that other realm. They fly into the night. They fly to the land of the dead. They fly to the land of the gods, to the land of the ancestors. And the next step in that is they come back with a message. So that the Messengers was the title of my book, and that came from people would, without any prepping from me, would send me a letter, and they'd say, oh, the owl landed on a fence post. And then I felt like I had a knowing that my father was fine. my father, who had recently died, was in a better place, and it was my and so then they'll just call the owl a messenger. They'll say, I felt so blessed to have this beautiful messenger in my backyard, and that showed up over and over again in the documentation. So that book just became the messengers. And so that ancient lore is still playing out today. Now, if we turn the clock back a few hundred years and we were living in a teepee in South Dakota, and you had a weird experience with an owl, you could, or let's say like a highly charged something where it felt like symbolically it showed up at just a certain point, or you felt like something from it, or maybe you saw it in conjunction with a glowing orb or something. You could go to the village shaman, and you could sit in his teepee and say, here's my experience. And the shaman could maybe take mushrooms to access other realms, or maybe he could beat the drum, or maybe he'd go into a form of meditation. But the shaman could use a non-ordinary state of consciousness to seek an answer. And that answer that he gave might be different than to the village over the next hill. But there was a system in place where people could talk about these things. That system is gone now. We don't have that system anymore. I'm that system. If you have that, well, I should be careful what I'm easy to Google. And so if someone has an experience with a UFO and owl, they're going to tell them about two mouse clicks away, and they're going to find me and they tell me their story. And so there's not much I can do. Like, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a shaman. So I can't say the deeper meaning to it, but I can say that you're not alone. You've had this. I did it to you. I did it to you earlier, like when we got on. Like you said, a weird thing happened. And I'm like, oh, that's not weird at all. That's as normal as can be that you saw an owl. So I've been a caretaker of these stories, I guess, for the last almost well over a decade. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting too, because aside from that and the screen memories and the archetype of the owl, you've come across a lot of stories too where there are real owls showing up around UFO sightings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that, I mean, people take pictures. It was funny. There was one researcher, his name is Dave Jacobs. He's not doing any research now, but I told him this story, and he said, Mike, if this was really happening, like he was really dismissive of me. He said, if this was really happening, people would take pictures. Why don't we have pictures of owls? And I'm like, are you kidding? I have this folder on my desktop where it's here's I have so many pictures of owls in people's yards. Like, here's the owl. Like, I was like, when the UFO flew over, and then there was this owl in my yard that night. And I got so many pictures, and they're all, I mean, owls are beautiful animals, and pictures at nights with a camera phone are pretty bad, actually. So they're all kind of blurry and such, but they're definitely owls. So I got, people are seeing owls. They're getting pictures of owls all the time, but that doesn't prove anything. What I'm looking for is the all I really want to impart in this work, and I've really kind of boiled it down. I really thought about this. I'm not trying to prove anything, because the cases they're sort of similar, but at the same time they're really divergent. And it's not like, if a nuts and bolts researcher, will go to the airport, and they'll say, did you get any weird radar returns on the night of, Thursday, February 12th? And the radar attendant might have some documentation. So then you have this piece of paper that says on this night, and then you take that piece of paper and you put it in a folder, and you put that folder in a file cabinet, and that file cabinet gets slammed shut and it never opens again. And it's like, what good is this doing if it's not shared, if you can't share it, if it does, so what I care about, I don't care if you believe these stories. I don't care but I do care that you feel the power of some of these stories. And if you read the blue book, The Messengers, yeah. Wow, there's a lot of stories in that book. Like, it's just it's packed with stories. And I try to tap into that power. Like if someone tells you a really good story, like you can feel it.
Right.
And even if it's fiction, right? You go see Bambi and it's a cartoon. And let me tell you, the hanky's coming out when Bambi's mom dies in the
Right.
woods, so it's a fake story, it's a cartoon, but it has an emotional power. So I want to make sure that the emotional power of these stories reaches people. Here, let me tell one quick one. This is
Yeah.
one, I got a lot of stories, but some of them take so long to tell. And this is one I can tell fairly quickly. A fellow reached out to me, and this is one I love. And there's no UFO in it. He's a Native American. Grew up on a reservation in Michigan. Now I'm from Michigan, and he told me where this thing was. I got to be careful. I can't remember now. I think it's the Huron reservation. And so he was a member of the Huron tribe, or is a member of the Huron tribe. And I looked this up and there's the reservation. It doesn't look much. It looks like a neighborhood, so, and on Google Maps, with a satellite view of it. So so he says, as a 12-year-old boy, I was flying my kite. And I was in a field and I was flying my kite, and I had the little string. There was a mechanism you could wind the string up, and I had this red kite, and then the kite got big gust of wind, pulls the kite out of my, pulls the kite away, and the ball of string just whoosh, it all gets dragged and it goes flying high, and then he watched it went into the forest. So he gets a friend and he says, I got to find my kite. Let's go find my kite. So they walk into the woods. They look up in a tree. And there's the kite. There's a kite. So they walk to the base of the tree, and at the base of the tree is an owl. And the owl is all wrapped up in the string. And they're like, this thing is going to die if we don't rescue it. So they get an adult, and they come back with scissors, and they cut the string off, and the owl's actually injured. So they keep the owl until it can fly again, and then they release the owl. And I said, are you a shaman? And he went, oh man, in a word, yes. And the reason I asked if he was a shaman is because I had heard so many stories from shamans that had that flavor and mood. Like, here's a boy on the Indian reservation, like, that has this powerful experience with an owl.
Right.
And so there's no UFO in that story. It's open. It's like, it's like a dream. It sounds, if I told you that as a dream, it would make more sense than if I had told you that as a real experience. Right. And so it's that story. I know how that story makes me feel, and I can't put it into words, but it has a power to it. And that's what really keeps me going in this work, is these stories that have that kind of emotional power. And I'm getting them. I'm getting about 2 a day, every day. Some days I get as many as 6 a day. Some days I don't get any, but that's rare. About 2 a day is normal. And that's been going on for 16 years.
Wow. You've really amassed a ton of stories related.
I've forgotten more stories than anyone else has. I've forgotten more owl stories than anyone else on Earth has ever heard.
Right. Wow. I mean, that's really incredible. And back to where there's involvement with real owls and the craft and UFOs, why do you think real owls are even showing up around UFOs? Like, why do you think there is a correlation?
Well, the correlation is, so anyway, here, we're dealing with a genuine mystery. Like the answer is, I don't know. But I can speculate, and I can do a pretty good job at speculating. So I would argue that the owls are, they're an archetype made real, right? So like an archetype, as opposed to like an archetype in a fable or in Star Wars, a movie that was based on the work of Joseph Campbell, who did archetypal research. They're showing up in the real lives of real people. So the other one would be they're an alarm clock. And I like that one. They're here to wake us up. They're here to wake us up to a deeper reality, let's say. Or let's say an individual's deeper involvement. That might be another way. And then I would say that they are here to announce initiation. So someone told me that one time. She gave me the thing. They're here to announce initiation. And that just rang true. That really seemed to, so, but an initiation, like that's a bold thing to say. Like, and then the other one is, I made a list of 4, and I'm drawing a blank on the 4th one. Archetype. Anyway, I can't think of the 4th one, but there's this. So those 4 reasons, I could look it up. I have a book I could look it up here in a second. But so your question is, why are real owls showing up in the context of a UFO event? That was the core of my research when I stepped into this stuff over a decade ago, when I started working on the messengers, which I started working on the day after, like, a bright light was behind a bush, and I was like sleeping out under a hill with a flying saucer on the top of it. So, so I started the book less than 48 hours after that experience. And so here's, I'm gonna do a little jump. I'm gonna jump out of this one story and just go. I'm going to talk about, there are 5 things that I found in my research, and I hadn't formally boiled it down like this, but I can say there are 5 things that are consistently showing up in my email inbox. One is that owls are connected to UFOs. I'm asking for that story, so I'm getting it. I go on podcasts and talk about owls and UFOs. Right on the cover of the messengers, it says owls, the messengers, owls, synchronicity, and the UFO abductee. It couldn't, like, I'm looking for these stories, but alongside the UFO, people are having owl experiences in connection with meditation, psychedelics, most often mushrooms, shamanic initiation. That story I told of the boy with the kite and the owl becoming a shaman, that is very, very common. There's shamans out there. It's a community of shamans. There's an apprenticeship. There is a lineage and knowledge within the shamanic community that owls show up. And I've talked to shamans, and they all say, "Oh yeah, we all know this." Yeah. So, and then the final one is owls and death, and that is the one that I think if I only asked for weird owl stories or unusual owl stories, I'd be getting mostly owls and death, and then a lesser degree the other ones. That's the richest vein to mine as far as these powerful stories. And so these 5 things: UFOs, meditation, psychedelics, shamanic initiation, and death. It's not that the owl is connected to the UFO. It's connected to these 5 highly charged human experiences. So a UFO sighting certainly qualifies as a highly charged human experience, but the owl is connected to these 5 things. There might be some other things out there to a lesser degree. I haven't. But this is what's showing up in my research. You know what? The near-death experience, I want that to fit in there. I want people to have a near-death experience and then see owls. I got no evidence of it. I've talked to like people who research the near-death experience, and it does not show up. And it feels like it should. Doesn't it feel like it should be on that list? It does
feel like it should.
It's not there. It might be. People might be having the experiences, and I just haven't heard them. But so once you said, why are they connected to the UFO? And then I'm like, well, they're connected to the 5 things. What do all those things have in common? I would argue that those things are all mystical. They all imply a parallel dimension of reality just beyond ours, right? Death, shamans, meditation, psychedelics. You go to an altered state of consciousness, so people go on a flying saucer, they come back saying, like, oh, time didn't work like it works here. Like, I had a heightened clarity. Like, I felt like I was on the flying saucer for 5 hours, and I get back and I've only been gone for 15 minutes. So there's all this weird stuff connected to this, that implies a mystical or a distorted level of reality that's somehow we cannot easily access. But every once in a while, we get a glimpse of it. Whether you take LSD, you get a glimpse into another form of reality.
If you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of the UAP sessions. Now back to the show. And I have one more question for you, Mike. Based off of what you've experienced and all your research and everything you've collected, and seeing how you're talking about the shamans having, interactions with gray aliens, and it has to do with consciousness and other realms and maybe other dimensions. Do you think that the gray aliens are something that's from another planet, or do you think it's from another dimension?
Well, first of all, I don't know what another dimension really means, right? So, I mean, that's like when people say, "Oh, it's quantum physics," and I'm like,
Right.
I don't know what quantum physics even
Right.
means. And you talk to like the people, like the experts, like the quantum scientists don't even know what quantum physics means. So I don't know what a different dimension is. I can say that, like, we have all kinds of ways to wrap our mind around different dimensions, right? So there's like the New Yorker cartoon where there are angels on a cloud playing harps. Like, that's in heaven. That's like a different dimension, but I don't think
Right.
there's angels on a cloud playing harps. It's like so, but I do say, so I would say yes. Here's what I would say. When the nuts and bolts researcher says, "Oh, this metal craft, like landed in the farmer's field, and the UFO occupant came out and seemingly took a little soil sample and went back in the flying saucer, and the flying saucer took out," they can go, "Oh, that's just like what humans do," right? So we flew to the moon and we took little soil samples, or we get in a helicopter and we fly into Yellowstone National Park and we tag the grizzly bears, right? So we basically abduct the grizzly bears. We do like medical procedures on the grizzly bear, and then the big bear's drugged, so it's like in an altered state of reality, and then the helicopter flies away, and then the bear's like, "What the heck? What just happened?" And but so you can anthropomorphize and say, "Oh, that makes perfect sense, that they're just beings from another planet visiting us the same way we visit the moon or the way we visit Yellowstone National Park." But it falls apart once you start talking to the people and really listening, because then they say, like, "Oh, like," so here's the questions I ask. What happened leading up to the event? What changed after? How would you rate your psychic skills? How would you rate your psychic skills? And the fourth thing is, do you have healing abilities? People who have owl and UFO, they are doing healing work. Like, no joke. They're like out there doing Reiki therapy, and they're like doing hands-on energy healing. It's really consistent. It's not 100%, but it is like, I'd say half the people who have an owl and UFO experience are doing healing work. Now, that's the role of the shaman, is to do energetic healing work, or some sort of healing work that's not on a physical level, like a doctor's office, let's say, physical level in the sense that, like, anyway.
Right.
So the healing thing. So, like, did the bear go back to the other bears in the forest and then have like magical healing powers and put his paws on the other bears and like cure their headaches or something? Like,
Right.
so it falls apart. So it's a genuine mystery, but I would say that the lore of us being visited by another visitor goes right back to the dawn of man. And whether, in ancient Greece, these visitors lived on the top of Mount Olympus. You go back to Ireland not so long ago, a few generations ago, these beings lived in the forest, and and there's a whole fairy lore that sounds an awful lot like the UFO occupants lore. You go to South Dakota, you talk to the tribes people there, they tell you stories that sound like with little people that live in the forest, and I think it's something universal that's been with us since all throughout human history and all throughout time. We live in a world that doesn't allow this kind of mystery, in this Western world where we like this kind of stuff is poo-pooed upon, and you just, the smart people that run the New York Times or whatever, like, so the New York Times is kind of covering this. I can't use them as an example anymore, but you know what I mean. The consensus
Right.
keepers of our reality, like they're not going there as far as like like I could say like the fairy lore matches the
It does.
yeah, like there's some wonderful Jacques Vallée's books on this stuff are amazing, and so your question was, are they from a different dimension or are they from another planet? I would say they're from here, or they're they're somehow connected, whether they travel here or whether they can just appear here instantly. I don't know where they're coming from. And if I said they were coming from another planet, I would just be anthropomorphizing. I mean, you talk to the people on board the craft, say, where are you from? And they'll say, we're from Arcturus, or we're from the Pleiades. But at the same time, you go to the shopping mall, and there's every December, and there's a big fat guy with a red suit and a white beard, and you ask him where he's from, and he says, I'm from the North Pole. And that's consistent. You can go to the next shopping mall over. That guy will say he's from the North Pole too. That doesn't make it true.
Right. That's a good point. That's a very good point. All right, Mike, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. Again, I love your work. You have your book, The Owls, The Messengers. Is there any other books that you want to put out there for people so that they can go find them?
There's 3 books in the nonfiction lore. There's The Messengers. There's Stories from the Messengers, and Stories from the Messengers is the stories I couldn't fit in. Oh, and I actually grabbed that one. That's where I wrote about the 4 things, and the 4th one I couldn't remember is the owls are the totem of the transformational experience. So remember, there's a 4th one. I'll think of it, and so I had to look it up in the book.
There it is.
And then I did a memoir of sorts, which is the blog posts from my blog. That book is called Hidden Experience, and that is like I got like 500 posts on the blog over a decade. And so I took about 90 of them and kind of threaded them together as a story. And it sort of tells the story of my awakening and coming to terms with this stuff. And then one, I'm going to actually show this one here. This one here is, I wrote a novel. So this is a nonfiction, or excuse me, this is fiction. So, but I remember I said the flavor and mood of these stories. I had so many stories, and I kind of like wove them together and tried to capture this flavor and the mood. And I will say, this is a story. It's a UFO based story. I never mention the word UFO in this story, but I do. But there's a few owls in there. There's not too many owls. There's a few owls in that story. And then people have been really resonating strongly with that book. And I say that cautiously, but if you read the reviews on Amazon, people really tapped into I've talked about the mythology of this stuff, and I tried to make kind of a mythic tale that takes place in present day. So
that's awesome. I'm definitely going to take a look at that book. Thank you for sharing that. And Mike, thank you again for your time. I love your work. Keep going. You're doing awesome stuff. And for anybody else who wants to check out his books, go check them out. And what social media do you use mostly? I can send people to you on
Instagram and Instagram or Facebook, and it's under Mike Clelland Author, and that's how you would find me. Mike Clelland, all one word. And if you can't remember that, just Google UFOs, owls, and I'm the first thing that comes up, and about the next 25 things under that. And I've got my homepage website has is pretty easy layout as far as finding the books and finding the. There's some illustration stuff there, and there's some camping stuff in there, and there's some and there's links to the podcast and such too. So,
all right, sounds good. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Great. This has been a joy. Thanks.